welcome all this morning as we take up once again the book of Job. And today we start our study in chapter 3. I think we had mentioned previously that for many people who are somewhat familiar with the book of Job, there is a sense that the book is very popular in its first couple of chapters and in its last couple of chapters. A lot of people say they really get a lot out of those. But the middle parts, not so much. But I would challenge us this morning to come with a mind that is open to what the Lord said. It's the same Lord who brought us chapters 1 and 2 and chapter 42 that brings us chapters 3 through 41 as well. And He is teaching us something through them. You know, as you look at the book of Job, in the first chapter, we read, of course, about how Satan approaches God to call into question the motives of Job. He basically accuses Job of being a fraud. Says that he's serving you because you pay him so well. So to test and to prove the matter, the Lord removes the external possessions of Job, including his children. At the end of the test, Job, of course, praises the Lord. Says, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. The charges were found to be false. But Satan comes back then in chapter 2 and says, well, the test wasn't complete because he was willing to not curse you in view of the fact that you might kill him. But if you touch his flesh and his health so that he thinks he's going to die, and I'm paraphrasing here, then he'll curse you to your face. So a new charge has been leveled. And the Lord then gives permission to test that charge, to test Job. And so as that unfolds, we now have the situation where he is in poor health. His wife, breaking under the pressure, tells Job to curse God and die. And of course, he refuses. He chastens her. And so far, Job is bearing up well. But I would remind us that just as with the testing of the Lord by Satan in the wilderness, where there was a period of 40 days which the Lord neither ate nor drank, he fasted, Satan came at the end of those 40 days also and tested the Lord by telling him to turn stones into bread and so forth. And then we read that after the Lord had successfully repelled that temptation, it says that Satan departed until an opportune time. So we saw with the Lord test, and future test. So with Job, we saw the test of his external possessions and his family, his children external to himself being removed. Then we saw the test where his outer shell was touched. Not external, but his body, his skin. Now we go, beginning in chapter 3, to the test of the inner man. And that's really where this is going on. Please do not assume that because Satan is mentioned in chapter 1 and is mentioned in chapter 2, that he then gave up and left. That this test is ongoing. And, interestingly enough, the events that we're about to read today and then through the rest of the book, basically, except for the very tail end where there's an epilogue, more or less, take place in one day. Chapter 1 took place in a few days. Chapter 2 took place mostly in a short time frame, although we don't really know how long it took from the time that Job began to be sick until his 3 friends arrived. But probably not years, most likely a period of weeks or months. Could have been many months, we don't know. But it wasn't that long. But it's been long enough that some things have unfolded which we'll find out about. But today we pick up once again, reminding us that chapter 3 ended with, chapter 2 ended with Job's friends being there, sitting with him on the ground, not saying a word for 7 full days, after tearing their robes, throwing dust on their heads, as a sign of grief. And the 7-day resting period, like they did, would have been common as a period of mourning for the dead. So we're going to see starting today that those 3 friends have a bit of a controversy that arises. And it would be easy with what is about to ensue to begin to think ill of them. And while there's something that we can think of ill about some of the things they say, after all, if you read the end of the book, you know the Lord says, you guys have not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has. Nevertheless, we see that they are also people of faithfulness, who have come to their friend and spent this time with him. And we see even at the end the Lord making provision for their forgiveness. So we should not consider them to be outside of the pale of faith, or people who are hostile to God or to his servants. We might consider them more like people that we know in church. People who mean well, people who have a theological understanding that is as mature as it can be and is fairly widely believed and common, but who then might also still have some growing to do. But in their present state, they still might say some things and do some things that reveal their incompleteness. And one of the many things that I think the book of Job helps us to see, because the book is full of things that are applicable to the church, but it helps us to see how godly people can sometimes be in a sense, our own worst enemy. It also helps us to understand something of the struggle. Because I believe, and we've talked about this a bit, I won't go into it in detail, except as we cover the text, and that is there's a way in which Job portrays the kind of suffering, though maybe not the degree, but the kind of suffering that the saints go through. The attack by Satan, the testing, God's grace to support, and then over time, God's working out that to the blessing for his people, to the glory of his name. That's the tendency of this book, and it's what we see unfolding in this particular case. Please don't think that Job is an isolated case in terms of the only guy that these dynamics happen to. Yes, the one-day loss of all of his family and his possessions. Yes, the extent of it happening in such a short time, that's unusual. But the dynamic of testing is not unusual. And this is here to help us understand and to be instructed in that. As we begin, I want to read briefly from a Psalm of David, Psalm 8, beginning in verse 3, where it says, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor." David writing this psalm saying, God, you've been so good to us. You've held man in high esteem. But who are we that we have this standing before you? And man has been given much standing, and yet we are still below God. We've been made a little lower than the heavenly beings. And because of that, though we're in the image of God, we do not have the full understanding that God has. We lack knowledge, and with the knowledge that we do have, we don't fully understand its application. And you put those two things together, and then you have a human fallen nature that does make decisions based on the things we know or think we know, and the things we understand or think we understand. And we take action, which if you look at it in those terms, compared to God's perfect knowledge and God's perfect understanding, we take action that is short of perfect. We can also call that sin, as we do it in disobedience to God. But even in our best days, there tends to be that ability to fall short because we don't understand. And sometimes the lack of understanding we have butts up against the lack of understanding somebody else has, and therein becomes conflict. And we see that beginning to unfold here. Although at first, Job, having had his friends with him for 7 days, begins to pour out his emotions in his heart before them. So that in Job chapter 3, it begins with this verse. After this, after his friends had sat with him on the ground for 7 days, mourning and grieving with him, not saying a word, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. I want to touch on that word curse just for a moment. We should not think that Job was standing here saying a lot of obscene words. By the term curse, that is not what that means here. It means that he was calling in for God to do something to bring a specific action against something or someone. So we see that elsewhere. May your enemies flee before you. That's a curse on your enemies and a blessing on you. Or may something bad happen to you. That would be a curse. Conversely, a blessing, may something good happen to you. May God bless you with abundant health, or something like that. So when we talk about blessing and cursing, we're talking about that form of basically saying, may this occur. So Job, and I'm not intending to read every verse today. What we're purposing to do today, if the Lord grants us this, is to go through chapters 3 through 7. And we're going to have to take chunks of chapters at a time because we have only a 12-week session. So I'm going to summarize briefly, but Lord willing, we're going to drill in on certain sections and certain verses as being indicative and important in highlighting the themes that are being brought out. So Job curses the day of his birth. And basically, in summary, what chapter 3 then is Job calling upon God to strike from the existence of history the day in which he was born. Basically saying, I wish I had never been born. And by this curse, he's expressing the tremendous depth to which he feels this, the tremendous emotion. God, remove that day from the calendar, let it have never existed. Then he goes a little further and acknowledging that, well, he has been born. But he says, well, Lord, then let me not live past the womb. In fact, let me die in the womb. I'd be better off being being in the grave than this life that I have. So he wishes for his death. And at the latter part of chapter 3, he mentions, beginning there in verse 23, he raises this question: why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? And if you've been paying attention, you've been here with us the past couple of weeks, you know one of the things that Satan said against Job is that you built a hedge around him, God. That's why he is such a faithful servant to you. And so God removed that hedge of protection. But Job, with his lack of understanding, sees it differently. He doesn't know what happened in chapters 1 and 2. He doesn't know there was a heavenly council. He doesn't know this is meant to prove him. All he knows is that things were going well, and now they aren't. And he's miserable, and he's wretched, and he's sick, and he's wondering about where God is in all of this, and why is this happening to him? And he describes it in terms, ironically, God has hedged me in. He's put a wall around me, not of protection, but of imprisonment, of pain, and of suffering. Why is light given to a man? He's expressing the wish to die. For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and groanings are poured out like water. Whereas he would regularly have food, regularly ate every day. He had his bread, he had his water. Now the thing that is served to him regularly is groaning or sighing. That is what marks his day, rather than the things that would have been normally present before. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, what I dread befalls me. We know that Job fears God and turns away from evil. We also know that one of the things that he feared was that his children might curse God in their hearts and die. Or that they would curse God in their hearts. And with the ensuing of that being death, potentially, he would intercede for them with a sacrifice, an atoning sacrifice, to turn aside the wrath of God. And yet we read here that the thing that he feared has come upon him. He's perceiving that God's wrath is upon him. And he'll address that more fully later. So this is a wretched condition. And he's poured this out, and basically asking God to kill him. Although these words are not, as I mentioned before, obscene, he's not saying obscene terms, yet to his friends, who were people of faith, people who believed in God as they would have understood it, understood him and understood the truths about God, these words would have had the effect of obscene words in a sense. For by wishing that God would remove this from the calendar, that wishing that he had never been born, they seem to see that Job is charging God with wrong. They have their own ideas about why this has happened to Job, as we're going to see very plainly. One of the things we need to understand is that the theology that God brings good things to good people and bad things to bad people is a very old belief. These events occurred most likely before the law was written down. These events did not occur in Israel. They occurred east of Israel. There was no mention of priests. This would have been probably more like the time, closer to the time of Abraham. So before Moses was around even. Before there was scriptures written that we have, there wouldn't have been the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. None of that would have been written yet. but there would have been a widespread knowledge of God, even as you see in Genesis 11, where God went in and scattered the people, and there were a number of people who, after Noah came off the ark, would have had knowledge of him. Noah's teaching him, his children, and so on and so forth. So that has continued on, and these people have some knowledge of God. They know something about sacrifice, and they have a belief system that includes this idea: bad things happen to bad people, and good to good. So though they have come to be with Job and to console him, they're going to start sharing a message. That Job, you maybe need to take a look in the mirror to see why this has happened to you. You've done some things. We can't get specific about what you've done, but it's pretty obvious that there's something wrong in you, Job. Of course, we've read the first 2 chapters, and we know that God himself has said twice that Job is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and turns away from evil. We know differently from them, but they don't know that. That same idea, by the way, still carries forward until the present day. It is replete throughout our culture, throughout, I think, many cultures, that if something bad happens, it's because God is wanting to get that person. Even in the New Testament, which would have happened much later than this, we're talking many centuries after these events occurred. Remember, the people came and talked to Jesus about the tower in Siloam who fell upon people, and the Lord said, "Do you think that these people were worse sinners than all the others, that this happened to them? You know, you too need to repent, or something. Well, the same thing will happen to you. You too will also perish." And even up until today, The Sound of Music. I think of the musical The Sound of Music, and there's a scene for those who like the musical, and those who don't, it's still there too. It's where the Captain Von Trapp confesses his love to Maria and wants to marry her, and she responds with a song in the musical, and sings about how somewhere in my youth or childhood I must have done something good. Nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. Somewhere in my youth or childhood I must have done something good. In other words, I'm getting this blessing of a marriage proposal from Captain Von Trapp because I did something good. Good then, harvest good now. And conversely, she could have sang it the other way if it had gone differently. But that's the point, is that this is throughout our culture, not even among people of faith. It's just a belief of karma, if you will. You do something good, you're going to get good things. If something bad happens, that can be a sign that somebody's been messing up in the past. That mindset was there then, still with us today. We begin to see it with the response of Job's first friend, Eliphaz. Eliphaz was a Temanite, Teman being in Edom, Edom being just more or less to the southeast of the modern-day Holy Land. Edomites were known to be people who were marked by wisdom. They really liked wisdom sayings. They would have really liked the book of Proverbs. That's the kind of thing that they enjoyed. And most likely, Eliphaz was a prominent person. He gets to speak first of the 3 friends. Probably a man of means, a man of stature, and because he gets to speak first, that means they gave him deference. So he's probably the top guy of the 3, which is why paying attention to what he says is important. Because, and quite frankly, the speeches of others devolve. They go down from here. But Eliphaz himself betrays what I've just said, that mindset. Though he starts off kind of gently. He says, and Eliphaz the Temanite answered, "If one ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? Yet who can keep from speaking?" Right away we begin to get a little bit of a warning sign. That is, he's been there quiet for 7 days. Nobody said a word. Eliphaz hears Job lamenting the day of his birth, cursing the day of his birth, and instead of saying, I want to speak to you something, Job, on the grounds of my concern for you, he's more or less implying, Job, I'm going to speak on the grounds of my irritation at what you've just said. Who can listen to this without responding? Behold, you have instructed many, and you have strengthened the weak hands. Your words have upheld him who was stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. Eliphaz notes that words can have effects. Words affect people. And they say, Job, your words, the things that, the sounds that come out of your mouth have had effects on others to strengthen them, to encourage them, to affect their behavior in a positive way. But then Eliphaz and his companions begin to embark upon a course of discussion that will all, again, this all happens in a single day, this discussion. They embark upon this discussion where their words seem to be, at best, rather carelessly chosen, if not chosen. I mean, that's giving them the benefit of the doubt, if not sometimes chosen deliberately to inflict pain. So Eliphaz is speaking up, and I do want to look at what he says in chapter 4 a bit more detail than maybe I will at what some of the others say, because of the nature of what he says. First of all, he says, is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? Starts off rather positively. He's affirming, it sounds like he's affirming Job's integrity. And again, affirming his fear of God. But then he picks up in verse 7 and says, remember, who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off? Now remember, one of the things that has just happened is Job has had his 10 children taken from him. They've been killed. Job has been scrupulous about sacrificing for them so that their sin would be atoned for, if there was sin. He's been very careful about this. And he himself, we can surmise from that, is a man familiar with sacrifice. Undoubtedly has sacrificed for his own sin as well. He's very mindful of being in right standing before God. So this first question, who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off, begins to lay the ground for what is going to ensue. If somebody dies, they deserved it. If somebody's cut off, they're not upright. That's the implication of these terms. And already Job's beginning to feel the jabs. For 7 days, these guys have sat with him. Probably, quite honestly, during the time since he has first had his, the first messenger came to say that some of your animals were stolen, until this point, probably some of the kindest actions anybody has taken. For 7 days, he's seen these guys there, not being mean to him, not being vicious to him, not being cruel. And in a sense, he has let down his guard, perhaps, by sharing the way he really feels. Oh, I wish I was dead, basically. And immediately upon saying that, boom, they come back and begin to attack him. Verse 8, as I've seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. If you reap trouble, what does that mean, Job? That means you've sown it. If you reap the outcome of iniquity, what does that mean, Job? By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they are consumed. In other words, God's anger is expressed through the things that befall the wicked. Job, what's befalling you? Yes, Mike?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I know that you're moving forward with the 3 friends. I've got one question for you. Can you speak to what seems to be a juxtaposition between, in the first couple of chapters, where Job is telling everybody, hey, look, God gives me all this stuff, God can take it away, blessed be the name of the Lord. So, in a sense, it would seem as though Job is speaking to God's sovereignty and his providence. But then in the beginning of chapter 3, it would seem that he's not questioning God, but now he's turning around and saying, kind of where his friends thought he was going. I wish that you would never have made this day. That seems as though he's saying, I know, in the previous couple of chapters, everything that you do is good, but here I wish you wouldn't have done that. Can you speak to the fine line and what appears to be a juxtaposition between, like, when I get frustrated, it's because of my selfishness of things are not going my way, whether it's, with whatever aspect of my life. And the same is true when I get frustrated. I'm getting frustrated with God because things are not going my way. So I've never been clear on how it is that carry over from one chapter to another, it appears as though he's backpedaling on something that he had said earlier.
And That's a great question, Mike, and I'd like to say a couple of things. I would not presume that these would be either comprehensive answers or completely satisfying answers. But I think, first of all, it shows something to the effect of theology that is incomplete. That while his friends are accusing him of saying, hey, we're looking at the fruit, we therefore can determine that you must have sown by sin. This is not entirely different from Job's mindset either. And so it's possible that during these months he's been ruminating what's happened, he's been waiting for relief, believing that maybe God is doing some kind of formative discipline or something like that. It hasn't changed. The situation is, if anything, is deteriorated, and during the course of these ensuing chapters we'll see how the trials have just continued to mount and pile up, and now these guys, in a sense, his most trusted friends, are giving him, if you will, the sharpest dig. But even before they speak, he's already showing that he's questioning. So it may be that he's been ruminating on this a bit and is wondering, maybe, Lord, maybe, it seems like you're revisiting my sin on me somehow. He's kind of already anticipating what his friends are thinking. And he's a little bit put out about it, as we're going to see, because he believes in atoning sacrifice. He believes that once an atoning sacrifice is made, repentance is present, that God forgives sins. And he's obviously been trying to figure this out, and he can't figure it out. And so it may be in part that he's questioning out of incomplete theology. And that's part of what marks us as well. We have a theological position that is as developed as it is to this date. And for most of us, it's probably as far developed in each of our lives as it has ever been to this point in our lives. But it's not complete. Another part of it is that he is human. He is made out of flesh and bone. He is a person with emotion. And things that happen can weaken a person's resolve. You could even put it in the sense that he is crying out because he is just in pain. In fact, that's one of the things that Job's going to answer, is that, and he's going to admit that what he said is over the top, if I may use a modern day paraphrase. And he says, it's because I'm in such pain. I'm hurting so badly. And that's why I'm saying these outrageous things. So I think it's a combination of misunderstanding coupled with just sheer pain. And even he will acknowledge, yeah, I wouldn't have said that if I hadn't been in such hurt. There's probably a greater explanation of it, but one of the things that is consistent about humans is that we are inconsistent. We can hold forth a belief, and then we violate that same belief a moment later. It's not necessarily hypocrisy. We're not necessarily pretending to have this belief, but we don't always, in every way, follow through consistently with the implications of that belief. So I can say, on one hand, I celebrate the sovereignty of God, and he was way miles ahead of tons of people, even to this day, and saying, the Lord has given. Unlike a lot of people, he didn't say, hey, I've earned that stuff. I earned those camels and those sheep. I earned those servants. I earned the oxen. I earned the donkeys. He said the Lord gave those to me. He saw the Lord took them away. That's very different from how most people even today would understand such a thing. So he was able to praise the Lord on that account. But now he's wondering, okay, the Lord was gracious to give. The Lord was even gracious in his taking. That's the Lord's ways. But it hurts. And I don't understand why he's not alleviating the pain. And maybe there is something he's holding against me, and I don't get it. And there's a sense in which that question is really, if you will, a growth pain for Job. He's going to enter here an understanding that he's never been in before. His understanding of the Lord, his theology is going to improve as a result of this. But the process isn't going to be easy. It hurts physically as well as in his spirit. So I think that's part of it too, Mike. The Lord is exposing his incompleteness. And it's a painful growth process. And it's necessary. And guess what? that can still be occurring with us today. And that inner person, whether it's with an outward sickness, or whether it's with circumstances that are bad, or whether it's with words that somebody says that we say, I don't feel good about that. Whatever it may be, that growth process can be painful, and it will expose inconsistencies. Thanks for asking that, Mike. I do appreciate that very much. So Eliphaz is here beginning to lay out his theology, which is also incomplete. And as good a guy as he was to come and spend a week, day and night, sitting with Job, he also has been thinking about why has this happened. And in keeping with the theology of his day, he thinks Job has been up to no good. Been keeping it under the rug, but the Lord's bringing it to the light by how the Lord's treating him. And so he's already saying what is conventional wisdom. And in verse 12, he adds to it a revelation that he says he received. Very interesting. Verse 12, now a word was brought to me stealthily. My ear received the whisper of it. Amid thoughts from visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, dread came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones shake. A spirit glided past my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes. There was silence. Then I heard a voice. Can mortal man be in the right before God? Can a man be pure before his Maker? Even in his servants he puts no trust, and his angels he charges with error. How much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed like the moth? Between morning and evening they are beaten to pieces, they perish forever without anyone regarding it. Is not their tent cord plucked up within them? Do they not die, and that without wisdom? So Eliphaz cites as part of his reasoning with Job, a spirit came to me by night and gave me these words. Now, what are we to make of that? He's using that as part of his argument, part of the case he's making that, Job, you can't be raising these questions like that. That's just not appropriate. And there's reading and preparing for this, I've read a number of different interpretations of the spirit, and they're all over the place. Who is this? What spirit is this? I've heard it all the way from the Spirit of God to Satan, and all in between. Some angel, some say he maybe made it up, maybe it was just a dream, and it could have, but it's an interesting thing because, again, just to those who say that it's from God, they talk about, hey, that sounds very, very theologically correct. Can a mortal man be right before God? Can a man be pure before his Maker? But think about it for a moment. If we were to look, actually, the phrase I just read, the thing that the Spirit told him, if we were to go literally what it said, because if you have an ESV, you'll see a footnote. It says that actually, can man be more right than God? Can man be more pure than his Maker? That's literally what the Spirit said to him, and the translators say, well, that must be, they're just talking about can he be right compared to God, not more right than God. But the words literally are that. Can he be more right? I can't say dogmatically or definitively who this is. I can say that at the end of the story, Eliphaz is told, you spoke wrongly of me. Not to say that everything Eliphaz says is wrong. Indeed, some things he says are excellent. But I'm not convinced that this particular part is necessarily particularly helpful in what he says in the ensuing verses. And in fact, I just to raise the question, could this have been Satan coming to him? A couple of things that to think about. And again, I'm not going to say that it is because the Bible doesn't say that's who it is. And we don't know when this vision occurred. If it happened 20 years earlier, obviously, then it wouldn't have been Satan coming to prep him to regurgitate this to Job. But if it happened the week before, maybe so. But the nature of the question, first of all, is interesting. Think back to Genesis 3. There's Eve minding her own business in the Garden of Eden. The serpent comes up and says, did God really say that you can't eat from any of the trees in the garden? Well, Satan's setting her up by that question. He's asking an extreme, ridiculous question, over the top. You can't eat from any of them? Well, duh. Yeah, we can eat from all of them except for one. then the answer that Satan gives then is totally the opposite of the question he asked at first. You can, too, eat from that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God knows you won't die. And basically, rather than the question he's asking being affirmed, you can't eat from any of the trees. Basically, his answer is you can eat from all of them, including and especially that one. Here you have a similar dynamic. Can man be more right than God? Well, duh, no. Then the ensuing words, nobody can be right before God. Even in his sermons he puts no trust. His angels he charges with error. How much more those who dwell in houses of clay, referring to people. And he ends up saying, is not their tent cord plucked up within them? Do they not die? And that without wisdom? Holds a very low vision, a very low view of humanity. Remember the psalm I read earlier on? Who is God? Who is man that you're mindful of him? You know, you made him a little lower than heavenly beings. Here it's like, whoa, you know, there is no hope. Can mortal man be right before God? Even if you take it as the ESV interpreters have put it here. He's basically laying out a hopeless case, if you will. It would be different if he says, hey, Job, man is inherently prone to flaw before God. So be aware of that, guy. So turn to the Lord and let him help you. Instead, he's effectively quoting the Spirit that says there's no hope. He doesn't trust his angels. Again, another thought that could lead one to think possibly it's Satan. The first piece of evidence he points to is how God treats his angels. Why would that be important to Eliphaz? I can tell you who it would be important to. And it would be part of Satan's motive for wanting to attack man. That is that he who was so important before his fall, now looks at these images or people made in the image of God, and he wants to bring them down. Because if he had to pay for his sin, these guys are going with me, so to speak. So it's possible. It's also possible it could be any of the other ranges, but I just want to lay that out. Just because he's making this case doesn't mean that his words are right. And if you look at the actual words themselves, he's laying out a hopeless condition. He's not really helping Job out much. He's not consoling him. He goes on even in chapter 5, call now, is there anyone who will answer you? To which of the holy ones will you turn? Surely vexation kills the fool and jealousy slays the simple. I've seen the fool taking root, but suddenly I cursed his dwelling. His children are far from safety. They are crushed in the gate. Wow, thanks for the consolation, Eliphaz. Talking about crushed children. Okay. No wonder Job needs to get agitated in response to this. This guy is there to console him. For affliction does not come from the dust, nor does trouble sprout from the ground, verse 6 and following. But man is born to trouble as sparks fly upward. Nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. That's basically the same thing saying there. But stuff doesn't just happen. It comes for a reason. Affliction doesn't just come from the dust, Job. There's a cause for it, and that cause is found in you. And then in verse 8, he goes all pious. As for me, I would seek God, and to God I would commit my cause, who does great and unsearchable things, marvelous things without number. And he goes into the next several verses in chapter 5, into this wonderful litany of great theology about God. He says a whole bunch of true things about God. He sets on high those who are lowly, frustrates the devices of the crafty, catches the wise in their own craftiness. That's 5:13. In 1 Corinthians, Paul takes this phrase and says, as it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. It's true. And you have this strange mixture of a guy who is able, on the one hand, to say great theology, and on the other hand, to say things that are cutting to the core to this hurting man. And I bring us back again to the 21st century church. I say, some things don't change. That same capacity exists and is exercised in the churches today. The ability to, on the one hand, to have a great confession of faith, and on the other hand, to walk in a way that is tone deaf to the condition of my brothers and sisters, to the extent that my words cut and hurt and destroy their spirit. So we see this man bringing that very thing to Job. He goes on to appeal to Job, hey, trust the Lord, which that in of itself is good, but given the fact that he has just knifed him with his words, and now he is saying these pious platitudes, it just twists the knife all the more. And quite frankly, remember, Job is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and turns away from evil. It's not like he needs the lesson. He already believes this. He already practices it. He's already turned to the Lord. Finally, he closes out his comments, Eliphaz does, verses 25 and following. Even in his pious platitudes, he's tone deaf. You shall know that your offspring shall be many. In fact, I'll back up one verse. You shall know that your tent is at peace. You shall inspect your fold and miss nothing. He's saying this to a man who's had all of his animals stolen. You shall know that your offspring shall be many. He's had all of his kids killed. Your descendants is the grass of the earth. Again, no children from whom to have descendants at this point. You shall come to your grave in ripe old age. Job is sick. He thinks he's going to die any minute. Like a sheep gathered up in season. Behold, we have searched this out. It is true. Hear and know it for your good. Ooh, that sounds so smug. The words of a man who is in good health, who has his family, who has the stuff that he wants to have in his life, speaking condescendingly, and I don't mean that in a good sense, but condescendingly and talking down to you, Job. This is the start. This is the wisest of the three. This is the man who went first because he was expected to have the best things to say to Job. And pretty much, that's true. So you can kind of imagine how that devolves from there. So chapter 6, Job answered and said, oh, that my vexation were weighed, that all my calamity laid in the balances, for then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. Job says, guys, Eliphaz, excuse me, I know my words have been rash. I know I've been speaking over the top. Duh. I've lost all my kids. I've lost my health. I've lost all my possessions. I've lost my reputation. This is a man who we'll see he was the greatest of the men in the East. He was at the epitome of respect in his people group, in the region. And now he's sitting in the town dump scraping off his skin, devoid of friendship. His wife has already tried to get him to kill himself. And as we'll see later on, he is the laughingstock of people that he would have. He said, there's people making fun of me. I wouldn't have hired their fathers to take care of my dogs. And they are treating me with contempt. He's fallen. He's hurting. And in this hurting condition, he said these things, and all that Eliphaz has been able to do is say, man, don't talk like that. You're getting what you deserve, effectively. And how lack of compassion just seeped from Eliphaz. Job goes on basically to say, I wouldn't talk like this if I wasn't hurting so much. Does the wild donkey bray, verse 5, when he has grass, or the ox low over his fodder? Do animals make noise about being hungry when they have food in front of them? No, they eat the food. We might say, does a hungry baby cry when he's eating? No, the hungry baby eats. The same kind of principle. He goes on to say, wishes that God would kill him. He reiterates that wish in verses 10 and following. Then in verse 14, he picks up a response to Eliphaz. And it's really a telling word. Because remember, this test is about the inner person. This is the test of Job's spirit and of his inner person. Verse 14, he who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. Job is not just saying a pious platitude that just happened to cross his mind. In the context of what Eliphaz has just said to him, he's now answering Eliphaz. He who forsakes, he who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My brothers, speaking of Eliphaz and his two friends, are as treacherous as a torrent bed, as torrential streams that pass away, which are dark with ice, and where the snow hides itself. When they melt, they disappear. When it is hot, they vanish from their place. The caravans turn aside from their course. They go up into the waste and perish. The caravans of Tema look, the travelers of Sheba hope. They were ashamed because they were confident. They came there and are disappointed. And he's talking about a phenomenon that occurs in the deserts, where after a rain or after a snow, there's these stream beds that are full of water. And the travelers passing through might take note, oh, there's a stream there. Well, I'll keep that in mind for when I travel through again. I know where there's streams in this place. But what they don't realize is that stream is only there during runoff or when there's snow. And they can look, and apparently they come through in the wintertime when there was ice in the stream bed. Okay, look at that. There's a frozen river there. I'll come back later on. What they don't know is that unless that is fed by fresh water or fresh snow, it's gone. It sinks into the porous rocks, and there's no water there to be had. So he gives the illustration then that there are people who go through, having seen that there was water or having heard that there was streams of water there, they go to where the water was known to be, caravans of people, and there's no water. And they end up dying of thirst because they put their hope on a stream that wasn't real. And Job says, verse 21, for now you have become nothing. You guys are like those streams. You guys came and sat with me for 7 days. And during that 7-day period, I looked and I saw what I thought was a promising source of refreshment, a promising source of spiritual water, if you will, for my soul, which is direly in need of that. I need some refreshing water. And you guys opened your mouth, and I see that you're a false stream. The promise of refreshment has evaporated into the ground, or evaporated in the sky, sunk into the ground, whatever. Point is that you guys are just like those false streams. Bam. He's taking off the gloves. He is not trying to be gentle with them. He's calling them for what they are, that they have not come to help. They may have thought they were, but that's not really what they're doing. In fact, he says in verse 21, for you have now become nothing. You see my calamity or are afraid. Have I said, make me a gift, or from your wealth offer a bride for me, or deliver me from the adversary's hand, or redeem me from the hand of the ruthless? And in other words, he is now calling them out. He says, your problem is you guys are afraid. You don't want to get too close to me because you think God is hitting me with punishment. You don't want to become my close friend. You don't want to take my part. You don't want to come to me and say, Job, man, we don't know why this has happened. Job, we hope this improves for you. Because you're afraid God's going to get mad at you, and you're going to get what I'm getting. You're just keeping a respectful distance. You've come to correct me. You've come to show some sympathy with me, but you're not going to get too close because you are afraid God will do it to you. And you could even say, in a sense, in their meditation on it, they may have wondered a little bit, what if it isn't that bad things always happen to just bad people? What if baby Job didn't do something wrong? That means that maybe it could happen to me too. They're afraid. Job's calling them out on it, and he's right. They are afraid. This is a good question to ask. How much does fear drive our interaction with others? How much do we let the unpleasant circumstances of others determine, I'm not going to get involved with that. I don't want to, that could bog me down. I could get enmeshed in that. So we keep a respectful distance. Go in peace, be warmed and filled. But I don't really want to expend much time and effort in that. Or if somebody says rash words, how do we respond? That's the problem he's facing here. He's spoken out his rash words in chapter 3. He says, teach me, I will be silent. Make me understand how I have gone astray. How forceful are upright words. But what does reproof from you reprove? Do you think that you can reprove words when the speech of a despairing man is wind? You would cast lots over the fatherless and bargain over your friend. It's sort of like he's saying, look, if you guys can't listen to me with understanding that I'm going to say harsh things because I'm in terrible pain, then you might as well go cast lots over your friends, cast lots over the fatherless. You guys think you're so pious and holy, but because you're not compassionate to me in my pain, you're betraying your lack of true piety. you speak great words about God. You're proud of your ability to articulate nice theological phrases about God. But your lack of compassion betrays your heart. What good does it do to have the right phraseology about God, at the same time to have a heart that is hardened against a hurting person? One of your hurting brothers, nonetheless. You're trying to reprove my words, but I acknowledge that my words are wind. I've spoken rashly because of my pain. But now be pleased to look at me, for I will not lie to your face. Please turn, let no injustice be done. Turn now, my vindication is at stake. Is there any injustice on my tongue? Cannot my palate discern the cause of calamity? In other words, serve me up some truth, and I will test your truth with my ears, just like the tongue tests food. If you tell me a good reason for what's happening to me, I'll know it by the taste of it to my ears, if you will, if that makes sense. So tell me something. Give me some words to help me, guys. Don't just come here and throw accusations at me. Unfortunately, we've heard the best of the discourse so far from them. But we're going to see some remarkable things in the ensuing chapters. We're going to see how in the midst of this terrible pain, and in the midst of this horrific thing, where he's even calling God's justice into question, no doubt, and he says some things that cause God to rebuke him later. But we also see in the midst of all this, some amazing truths come out of this man's mouth, and a faith that never lets him curse God and die. Even on this worst day of his life, the fact that he is a believer in God and that God is at work in him will still shine forth. And we'll see that. I'm saying that, that's a little preview. But it's something to remember. We want to go a little bit further with this because chapter 7, Job continues talking. He comes back and, Brother Steve?
In 20, 29, and 30,
Yes.
is he saying, is he claiming innocence there and saying, is he claiming innocence and saying, I don't know why this is happening because it can't be because I've sinned?
No, I would not say that, Steve, because he will be, we'll see this as we go further, he's expressly open about the fact that he has sinned. And he's put out with the Lord a little bit because he thinks the Lord is calling his sin back into account. So I think what he's saying there is that he, just like the Lord says he is blameless and upright. The Lord doesn't say that because Job had never sinned. He's saying it because Job has brought his sin before the Lord in the appropriate way. He's brought the atoning sacrifice, and he's covered. And so the Lord is able to say he's blameless, not because he's never done anything blameworthy, but it's been addressed, it's been atoned for, it's covered. And so I think that's the tenor from which Job is speaking in this. Job believes he's understood rightly that to be right with God, you give sacrifice. You repent, and then you are right with God. His faith is strong in the belief that God does forgive sins. So I think that's what he's coming from. But he's also, I think, saying that in this present case, in light of the fact that I've brought all my known sin before the Lord, I don't get why this is happening. Because if God's punishing me, I don't know what it could be for, because I brought everything before him. It should already be dealt with. And that's where part of Job's lack of understanding is coming into play. He doesn't get it either. It kind of shares the same mindset as his friends. Bad things should be happening to bad people, and this has happened to me. And even though he has earlier said the Lord is given and the Lord is taken away, he kind of buys into this a little bit because it was the prevailing theology of the time. And so he's saying, look, I'm not aware of any present sin, basically, in this context. I'm not lying to you guys. I'm not hiding something away. I'm just sharing truthfully. Charlie?
Yeah, it seems, from the early chapters and then from these chapters too, that Job's not just a good man, but he's a great man. And that his friends are good also. He's much greater, but we need to keep in mind that regardless of how great we are, none of us are really there.
Amen to that, Charlie. And that's true, because Job's understanding is theologically far above. And as we'll see, even as if we had read more of what Eliphaz said, he basically is saying, look, Job, repent and God will give you back your stuff. And part of it is the motive that, hey, do this so that God will give you your stuff back. But Job's not buying that. Job is already on record as saying the Lord gave. In other words, there's that subtle difference between if you follow the rules, it's almost a name it and claim it kind of thing, almost a prosperity gospel. If you do these things, then God will give you blessing. So do that, Job, and you'll get blessed. And Job's saying, no, the Lord gave that to me. I didn't bargain with him. I didn't go out and do these things so that God would give me stuff. He's taken it away for his own reasons. He gave it to me for his own reasons. That's sovereignty, folks. God is not beholden. God does it because he chooses to. And at no point in this whole story will Job ever say, well, Lord, give me back my stuff. Never. Never. Yes, Tim?
Yeah, just as you keep describing Job and his situation, what are your thoughts on, I would think that like something that adds to this is, and I'm reading this anachronistically perhaps because this is probably, before these laws came about, but do not admit a charge against someone based on 2 or 3 witnesses. Here he has 3 friends, and in addition, even I think of in Deuteronomy the covenant curses and the covenant blessings. Do this and I will bless you. Don't do this and I will curse you. It seems like that's even part of the counsel here is that you must have done something that made him angry, so he's cursing you righteously. And I don't. Of course, I mean, this is hard to say, but like, to Job's conscience and as he's trying to weigh all these things out, I wonder if any of those things had weight on him. What are your thoughts on this?
I think God has been revealing himself from the outset to human beings, and part of what Job and his friends have is the revelation that had been given to this point. We believe in progressive revelation. There was a lot more to be revealed. Some of it is revealed through Job for the first time in this book. We're not there yet, but I think some of that idea, that concept, as you mentioned, Tim, that under the covenant between God and Israel, there were some of these things institutionalized. Now they weren't yet,
Right.
And some of them. But the same kind of mindset that God is just, that basic concept, God rewards faithfulness and righteousness, and he punishes wickedness. That's true. That's true. But the particular application of those concepts is where these guys got into trouble. They're saying, Job, we see trouble, and they took that simplistic concept and they took it to its logical extreme. That means that if something bad is happening, then it can only mean that you did something bad. So I don't know that it would be anachronistic in that sense. I think that they understood rightly that God punishes evil and blesses good. But they took it, because of their lack of understanding, they took it the wrong way. And of course, the ultimate was what? The Lord Jesus. In Isaiah 53, he was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The verse before that says, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. At the time of Jesus' crucifixion, the apostles would have been devastated, not just because of the loss of their friend, but it would seem to be a repudiation of Jesus standing before God. The day of his death, it would seem like this theology would have been in place. It would have seemed, well, there's God's judgment on him, killed him. 3 days later, that was proven to not be correct. But that points out the fact that if somebody is suffering tremendously in the meantime, it doesn't mean God is not approving them. Quite the opposite. And that's true here too. The reason that Job is suffering is because God did approve him and Satan challenged that. So there's a lot to be said. I want to read one more thing. We need to go, but I want to read one more thing out of chapter 7. As he comes down to this, chapter 7, verse 17, an ironic twist to what would be the psalm I read at the start. What is man that you make so much of him, that you set your heart on him, visit him every morning, and test him every moment? How long will you not look away from me and not leave me alone till I swallow my spit? That's the same soaring word that David wrote. Wow, what is man that you were so mindful of him? To Job, those same kind of words. What is man that you pay so much attention to me, that you don't leave me alone, you don't ease my suffering. I can't even swallow for a moment. I don't even know a swallow's length of time. And that's what his mindset is he still suffers. So we're in the midst of this internal test of Job, and we need to stop there. For next week, please read chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11. 4 chapters, 8 through 11, as we see the next guy answer Job and Job answer him. And this continues, folks. As you begin to see, this is not just boring stuff. This is not just meaningless conversation. This is laying out truth that is still applicable today. It's laying out the kind of dynamics that occur in the church, in the world, and it's very, very relevant. So thank you for your attention. Let's pray and we'll be dismissed.